Stephen Wilson, welcome to Australian Musician.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, great to speak to you. The last time I spoke to you was over the phone, so this is the first time we get to speak to you face to face, and that was right before you came out for To the Bone and played all these beautiful theatres around Australia. And of course, a lot has happened in the years since. We had The Future Bites, a divisive record to say the least, but still very well produced. And then obviously lockdowns, and that led to a number of things. There was the Album Years podcast, Closure Continuation with Porcupine Tree, the book Limited Edition of One, which I have been listening to on repeat to the point where I can recite entire passages from memory. Sorry, that's my Asperger's and OCD taking hold. And then, of course, a marriage and family, and now finally the Harmony Codex. So congratulations on the new record. What's the response been like?
You just summed up my entire life for the last 5 years. Amazing. It's been amazing. I mean, I pride myself in always doing something different with each record. So as you can imagine, that, I mean, you mentioned the previous album, The Future Bites, was quite divisive, and it was, and I knew it would be. But this album seems to have been almost universally accepted by new fans, old fans, people that knew me, people that didn't know me. And I couldn't really have planned for that. I don't know what it is about this record that means it kind of across the board, it just kind of seems to resonate. Maybe it's just the fact that it's very eclectic and there's something on this record for everyone. There's ambient pieces, electronic pieces, prog pieces, acoustic guitar ballads. There's a bit of everything on here. So there's like a doorway for everyone to walk through into this world of the Harmony Codex. And I think ultimately it just sounds like a Stephen Wilson record. It's very hard to pigeonhole exactly what kind of record it is. And maybe that's what people want these days. There's so much music around these days. Arguably there's too much music in the world now. So maybe what people are looking for is something that's a little bit harder for them to categorize, and they want something that's going to confront their expectations and perhaps be a little bit more challenging to them and be a little bit more unique in that respect.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely. Is that I'm a working musician myself, so I haven't had a hell of a lot of time to digest the record, but I've had to listen at least once through, and my Blu-ray arrived from Burning Shed last night, so I had to listen to a bit of the 5.1 mix. But absolutely, there is a little bit of something for everyone, and certainly, like you say, there's a bit of an acoustic thing, and especially these days, like I kind of primarily move in like the roots rock scene, and I do a lot of folk and blues festivals. But during lockdown, I wrote my own little concept album about the effect of mental health, the effect that COVID had on mental health, and using the time to kind of of what it meant basically to be a musician in the 21st century. And that quote that that has been going around quite a bit, that you've given, of when everybody's making music, it's better to just if you are going to make music, you're better to stand out and just do whatever the hell you want. That's been a mantra that I've taken to heart. Absolutely. So thanks so much. And yeah, there's some great stuff on here. So you've spoken about the album as kind of a journey. And so could you maybe just go through a little bit about what the story was behind this album for those who haven't read Limited Edition of One, and what the inspiration was behind it?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, just to clarify exactly what I mean by that, I don't necessarily mean when I talk about this album, this idea about the album being a storytelling sort of aspect to it, having a storytelling aspect to it, I don't necessarily mean literally. What I think I mean by that is that the when you listen to the album, it feels like the music is taking you on a journey. So there isn't, I don't want people to think there's some kind of narrative going on through the lyrics. There isn't. There is certainly a kind of conceptual core to the record. And that does come from the book. You've read the book, so you understand what I'm talking about here. There's this idea, I think, that goes through the book, both in the story, but also through the autobiographical material too, that life is very much about the journey. It's not about the destination. It's not about the arrival. It's about the process. And very often what we find in life, certainly this is the way I feel, you know, I'm in my mid-50s now, so I've been, you know, certainly reflecting on this a lot over the last few years, is that a lot of the most incredible things about my life, a lot of the most beautiful things about my life are things that I didn't necessarily expect or anticipate or even had particular ambitions to achieve. They're almost the things that happened to me by accident along the way while I was pursuing something else. And in a way, that's almost like a metaphor for my entire career. You know, my career has been kind of odd in a way. It's not been conventional. I've never been a mainstream artist. I've remained very much on the periphery of what's, you know, what considered to be populist or mainstream. And I've managed to do pretty much exactly what I want, but I've managed to create some kind of audience nevertheless, enough of an audience for me to be able to pursue my dream. Now, that occurs through a lot of the album in the form of this metaphor of the infinite staircase. So the core kind of icon, it's what appears on the front of the album, this kind of colored representation of a staircase. It's a metaphor which appears in lots of the different songs, is this idea of being on an infinite staircase. So this idea of never really arriving, that life is about the journey, and it's not about arriving. And you have to kind of embrace that and take that as a positive thing. So the story, the Harmony Codex, is the central kind of conceit in that story is this idea of the infinite staircase. It's a very surreal image, the idea of these two kids getting on this staircase and never arriving again at a destination. And that core theme runs through the whole of the record in different ways, sometimes in a more literal way connected to the story, sometimes in a very oblique way, very sort of peripheral, if you like, to the story. But I think, to come back to your original point and my original statement, regardless of whether you engage with the lyrics or not, and regardless of whether you engage with the story or not, listening to the album will feel like you're being taken on a journey, and it'll feel like you're being told a story through the music alone, if that makes sense.
No, you're absolutely right there. And especially like stuff like Impossible Tightrope and the Harmony Codex, which are these extended pieces, but not necessarily long songs. They're more soundscapes that just kind of build. And it's like each step you go up is like adding another layer to the piece. So Impossible Tightrope was one of the singles, if you can call it that. And I guess, was there a conscious decision to put that out as one of the pre-album samplers?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things I've struggled with over the years, and obviously this becomes increasingly an issue in today's sort of music market, is the idea that you have to somehow represent yourself through 30 seconds of audio. How do you, in the TikTok generation, in the YouTube generation, where most people only watch a YouTube video for about 30 seconds before they've clicked on something else, how do you relate what you do, particularly if you do something like I do? I mean, I make albums. I think of albums as kind of the equivalent to making a piece of cinema. How do you sell that to someone in 30 seconds? How do you represent what you've done? And the Harmony Codex is a 65-minute, incredibly complex, incredibly layered, and incredibly eclectic and diverse continuum of music. How do I represent that in one song? So the answer to your question is there was a decision made very early on that we're going to release 4 songs in very quick succession, 1 a week. First one was Economies of Scale, which is kind of this very electronic, very minimal, very sparse piece. The following week with an 11-minute sort of prog jazz electronic epic, Impossible Tightrope. The following week it was Rock Bottom, which is this big kind of, you know, duet thing with Ninette, this big kind of power ballad. Follow it the week after that with What Life Brings, which is this kind of acoustic, very nostalgic, very traditional acoustic song, nostalgic song. 4 very different representations of the album. And even then, I don't feel they completely represent the album, but it's trying to circumnavigate this issue where people, unfortunately, it's one of the things people do. They hear 30 seconds, they say, oh, that's what the album's like then. No, it's not. It's just one tiny piece of the jigsaw. And it's very frustrating to me, and it has been very frustrating to me over the years. So I think there was a very conscious decision this time to put out 4 very different songs a week apart, leading up week 5. Now here's the whole album. And I think it worked. I think people got the idea, okay, this is a very diverse, very eclectic record.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's always a challenge when you're making an extended piece of music and not just putting out a singles like months apart or whatever. When like in my case, like I said, I came up through the blues and roots scene, but I've tried to add more of like, I guess, a kind of a progressive aspect to it, paying homage. And you've spoken in the book about like breaking out of the metal scene and wanting to try and break out of that kind of conceit or that myth that you were a heavy metal artist or anything close to that. And me, I'm trying to break out of that blues scene and that roots scene. So it's like you say, it's a never ending journey. But I think each time you get a little bit further. And certainly, I see the TikTok videos, and I'm not on TikTok all that much, but I had a meeting with a musician yesterday who even said something like, to try and break the algorithm, you've almost got to stay on TikTok for a certain amount of time, or on Facebook or on Instagram after you post something, to try and keep engaged. Now, you obviously employ promotional teams to get your message across. So what would you say you've learned from the whole social media campaign surrounding the Harmony Codex?
It's fascinating to me, this world. You know, one of the things, obviously, I've been doing this for 30 years now, and the business that I entered in 1992, I became a professional musician. So 31 years ago, the business I entered, the way the music business is now is unrecognizable. It's absolutely unrecognizable, and it's completely transformed into something that the 20-year-old me that became a professional musician would not recognize. And having to adapt to that is kind of fascinating in a way. You know, the whole idea of how you promote music, how you market music, how you engage people in what you do has completely changed. And I think one of the reasons, you know, it's fascinating to me how rock music, which was the dominant musical form, and I think I wrote about this in the book, so you pardon me if I'm repeating myself here, but yeah, I'll say it anyway. Rock music, which was the dominant musical strain for the last half of the 20th century, and which was responsible for sending jazz music into a realm of cultdom, has itself now been sent into cultdom by urban music and by electronic music and modern pop. That's fascinating to me. And as someone that comes from the tradition of rock music, that also has its challenges. Of course it does. I mean, I'm clearly still a rock artist. Although I make a lot of electronic music these days, I still clearly come from that tradition of rock music. I think in terms of you know, albums, side 1, side 2, you know, even that itself is something that belongs to the past in a way. But I can't change that. I came from that. I came up through that generation, and I think in those terms. And I think one of the reasons rock music has become, you know, a cult, I won't say obsolete because I think it still has a lot to say. It's become a cult is because it hasn't understood that the way musicians need to engage with their fans has changed. And it's something that urban artists have completely understood. And that you see the way, and I think there's something you can learn from watching how a lot of the modern generation of musicians and pop artists engage with their fans. And I've tried to do that, you know, even though it's a little bit alien to me, I've tried to do that because at the end of the day, of course, like all musicians that work very hard on making something and creating something, I want to share it and I want to see it reflected back at me through the eyes of people that listen to the music and engage with the music. So that is why I hire people to understand that world, you know, and I will defer to them on their advice when it comes to those things. And I think it's great that music continues to evolve and continues to change, perhaps even in ways that I don't necessarily understand or can relate to. But I think it's important that music will continue to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, you see, I think people have said like there's a corner of social media for every kind of music. And like you say, rock is not obsolete. And I guess in that regard, you're kind of putting acoustic acts and country acts maybe kind of in that realm as well. Because I was just reading an article before I jumped on here that said like that country music has still got like it's still in the mainstream over in America, but like here in Australia, it's still a very niche kind of market.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
yeah, but then you've got a band like Ghost, who were just out here, and they played like a 10,000 seat arena, and they basically just went viral with one song that was essentially a B-side from a 7-inch that they put out a few years back. So they've, but I think the big thing with that is that they have a strong, clear visual identity, and there's a certain mythos around it. And I guess you could say the same with the Harmony Codex, is that this idea of well, the image is so striking and so asymmetrical. Like I look at this, this picture with like 10 different colors, and my brain just goes haywire. And it's so that kind of brings me to, I guess, Carl Glover. Was it a true collaboration, I guess, with you and Carl Glover with creating the graphic design for the album, or did you kind of leave him
actually, yeah. Well, actually, the main image was created by a German illustrator called Hayo Muller. So there was a three-way. Carl was involved.
Yeah, that was more my question, was like, how much, what's, because it says in there Hayo Muller illustrations. So that's Hayo's illustration, is it? Yeah.
The front cover is Hayo's, yeah. So Hayo was pretty much responsible. And what's interesting to me, at least, was working with someone like Hayo almost from the very beginning of the creative process. So, you know, literally I'd written like 2 or 3 songs, and already I was engaging with Hayo, and we were developing the ideas, and he was reading the story. I love that. You know, I've always loved the idea of multimedia. I've loved the idea that you don't just make an album. You don't just put 10 songs on a record. You create a whole concept around it. You create a world, you know, visuals, videos, the live show, the t-shirts, everything is kind of connected, and everything is kind of part of this overall, I don't want to say brand, because brand is kind of an ugly word, but you are creating an identity which goes right across all of these different media. I love that. I've always loved that. You know, ever since I grew up being as much in love with movies and literature as I was with music, they were always together for me in my mind. And I love that multimedia thing. And it's no longer enough. I mean, you mentioned Ghost. I think that's fascinating. I think without their image, they wouldn't have achieved what they've achieved. The image is as much a part of it. And if you think about it, it's always been that way in pop music. Image has always been such a fundamental, marketing, branding has always been such a fundamental thing. Even bands where you think, well, they don't have an image. You know, the fact they didn't have an image was kind of their image. I think of bands like Radiohead, and Pink Floyd, where it was all about the enigma, it was all about the mystery, and the fact that they weren't, pushing themselves as personalities was in fact what a lot of people connected to. And if you look at the artwork, it's very conceptual, it's very intellectual, it's very cool, it's slightly detached. It's as much about the branding as anything. It's as much about the branding as Taylor Swift is today, So I think that's always been a part of the pop music world. And I love that, and I embrace that. And I find that very interesting. So working with people like Hayo and Carl to create this kind of, this image and this iconography that goes along with the Harmony Codex is as much a part of the artistic and creative process as making the music for me.
And I think you've always kind of had like a striking album cover, and I always go back to the clip in the Insurgentes documentary where you're speaking about like the idea of an album cover as part of the piece, and that like unless you give them something that looks good visually, they're going to download it, and that's why even these days, like I rarely buy, because I have a record player now. I very rarely buy CDs unless it's a proper gatefold, or if it's a media book. And in this case, like I went for the Blu-ray because I knew that the surround and the Atmos mix was a big part of it, and you want people to experience that. Unfortunately, my surround mix is a little asymmetrical because it's out in the dining room, but that kind of approach to music as a conceptual thing is absolutely what I think more artists should take into consideration. So I think
it's funny because I mean, we have this notion in the world of the pop music world, we have this notion of alternative music, and it makes me laugh sometimes because people say, Nirvana was an alternative. That's not alternative. That was one of the biggest rock bands in the world, sold millions of records, mainstream. That's not alternative. The alternative is people like me who make music that is outside of the mainstream, that provides an alternative to the mainstream. So this notion of alternative music, which I've always found slightly surreal and slightly odd, but I think that's been my career really, is providing the alternative, providing something that does give people an opportunity to engage on a deeper level, intellectually, musically, emotionally, with an album as a kind of musical continuum, a musical journey. This is kind of alternative music in 2023, isn't it? Because everything else in the mainstream is about short, sharp, immediate. It's all about the vocals. When was the last time you heard a guitar solo on a modern pop record, or any solo? It's all about vocal now. So my record's got all of this very intricate musical sort of aspect to it. And I think for me, that makes me, even though I say so myself, it makes me the ultimate, alternative musician in 2023. That's the way I look at it anyway.
Yeah, and I can't recommend you to people enough, even if they don't necessarily like this record. Like I've got two of your records over here, which are two of my absolute favorites, and I know for you as well. So certainly there's something in your back catalog for everybody, and even on this new record. And I'll quickly wrap this up, but from what I've heard, basically, so the next step would basically be to somehow take this on the road. From what I've heard about like the recent record store signings, every time someone asked you like about a tour, you kept saying, well, watch this space. Well, has there been any development on that front?
There are discussions going on about how let's just say that I'm committed to the idea of presenting this music live in some way. And it's really a question of how I do that, what's feasible, how much spatial audio might be a part of it, because I would love to be able to, create the music in a live context, still bringing that spatial audio aspect to it. So I'm fairly certain there will be some. But yeah, I'm still going to say watch this space as regards exactly how and what and when when that will happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and even if you don't make it out to Australia, I am especially looking forward to seeing what you come up with, and it's also the Porcupine Tree live record, which I believe is coming out next year as well.
Oh, the blue, yes, the film, the Blu-ray film, yes, that should be out early next year. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and all the best for the Harmony Codex and beyond.
Fantastic. Nice to speak to you too, Josh. Cheers, buddy. Have a great day. Bye now.
You too.
Bye.